All right. So, when I submitted this was the title I gave for the project, for the presentation. And after I looked at it a little bit and I said, I don't like that. So I decided to change it and to change it to this. This was actually a friend of mine suggested this to me. The other thing I want to let you guys know, this URL down here, if you guys want to bring it up on your computer, you can follow the slides on your computer with me. So it's just easier sometimes. A little bit about me. I am a user interface developer and consultant. I do part-time design and user experience consulting, which translates into people bring me in to do development and say, by the way, can you do some UX and design work? And I'm like, sure, I can do that. I pretend to be an architect, and my list of clients range from in different technology fields or different business fields. Staples, VMware, Isobar Molecular, which is an interactive agency, Harvard Business School, MIT, Comfort Technologies, which is a startup, and AltaSource Labs. Usually when I'm brought into a project, a lot of times I'm brought in to help with some issues with the technology, performance issues. If there's some front-end performance issues and CSS issues, particularly, one of the first questions I ask is, what framework are you guys using? And invariably, it is either Twitter, Bootstrap, or Foundation. And after looking at the code a little bit, there is where I see the crux of the problem. And essentially, that's what the presentation is going to be about. What issues these frameworks cause and how to avoid them or what to do. Okay, that's good. So the other thing was at one of the projects that I was at, there was a recent conversation that I had, which was we had a meeting and I came into the project and they were talking about it and it said they wanted to upgrade from Foundation 3.2 to Foundation 4.0, and they said we can't do it. The stakeholders asked, well, why? And the reason was because some of the class names have changed, and by bringing in Foundation 4.0, everything will break. Obvious question was, well, what is the effort? And the answer was a lot. And so that's where most of the problems happen in these projects when, oh, am I backwards? Oh, technology is not working for me today. All right, so let's move on. One of the first things I tell them, all right, here we go. One of the first things I tell them that let's not use Twitter, Bootstrap, and Zurb Foundation. Invariably, the reaction I get is this. There's all sorts of discussions, why not, blah, 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 and this presentation is going to be all the reasons I tell them why we shouldn't be using it. They go back to their desk, they look at their CSS, they look at the framework, and then they come back to me like this. So it's been, in some places it's been a struggle, in other places it's been a little bit of the different grief phrases that they go through, and they invariably sometimes agree that maybe we shouldn't use it. So why such a stance? Why have such a black and white stance of not using this foundation or Bootstrap? So one thing that these implementation of these frameworks will miss is semantic HTML and CSS. You want to write your HTML and your CSS semantically. By building a framework for everybody to use, there's hardly any room for something like that to happen. And I'll get into examples of why such a thing is not achievable. Design implementations can break the chain. So you, with Bootstrap, with Foundation, you get a standard button that comes along with it. Well, most likely you're not going to take that blue button and use it. Essentially you want a different kind of button. Well, when you implement your design, you kind of break the chain between the framework that you just implemented and your design. And essentially you have lost connection with the framework. We'll get into the details about that also. Performance implications. As a result of trying to keep CSS framework and implementing your design, you may be putting a lot of extra code to overwrite what came with the framework. That is going to add bloat to your CSS, and as a result is going to have performance implications. Object-oriented CSS implementation. Well, in order to build building blocks of your site and have an object-oriented manner, you need to know what your design is. You need to know what those building blocks are. The framework does not know that ahead of time for you. File organization. I'll be honest with you, I'm very disappointed in the file organizations that come with a framework. You either get the whole CSS Bootstrap in one file, which is fine, but if you're using the less version of Bootstrap or the SAS version of Foundation, the organization of the file that comes with it is missing. And in general, most projects that I've gone into, the file organization has been a weak point. We'll get into as much details as I can with that, but that's a whole nother talk if needed. Sorry. Coding conventions. Are there any? When you implement Bootstrap or Foundation, they don't publicize the coding conventions that they're using. Do you have to go look in the code to follow that, or are you going to write your own? And as a result, are you going to have a kind of a mishmash of different coding conventions, naming conventions, commenting, things like that? Okay. Once again. So let's talk about semantic HTML and CSS. So the overarching reach of the framework prohibits it from being able to create semantic HTML and CSS for you. Conceptual naming versus semantic naming, well, they have to create something in a very generic name. Examples of that is you have button primary, button info. Those are not semantic names. Those are those are generic names. You have a style of nav bar. Well, is that the top nav bar? Is there a side nav bar? Is there a nav bar in the footer? Better examples of semantic naming is button submit or general button action, main navigation. All those things are things that you do not get with a semantic HTML and CSS. And the way I implement CSS in HTML is it has to tell the story, a little bit of the story of what and where you're implementing this. If you have a nav bar, obviously you're going to use a nav element, but also with your CSS, you're also semantically going to start explaining to whomever comes after you what that navigation bar is going to do. If you have, for example, you want things to be positioned relative and you have a class, you create a class that says relative position, and you can apply that anywhere you want. Those are some of the things that you should be able to do, and when installing a framework, you're kind of missing that. Design implementation. So when it comes to implementing your design, this is where the framework falls short. So let's take a look at an example of this. So on the left, what you see is what comes with Bootstrap. What you want to do is you want to be able this is an implementation of a button. You'll see the first one at the very top is a default button. If you just put a button element on a page, that's what you get, no styling. The next one is the button with style, which is just basically your .btn class that you add. And the last one is the .btn plus a .btn primary. Well, what your design team has come to you and said, we want the default buttons to look like this. One of these are supposed to be green, but let's ignore that. The concept is there. So you have to go from what Bootstrap has given you to what the design team wants you to implement. So you have three options, in my opinion, to do that. Option one is to come in here and just create custom classes. You're creating a whole new custom class. I have a new button class here. I have an action button, and so on. And you just simply implement that by adding the class here. This is fine. You end up adding, the cost of this is you end up adding 59 lines of extra code, and you're hardly using Bootstrap code at all. You're leveraging a little bit of the button, but you're hardly using it. I know 55 lines of code doesn't mean much, but you compound that over all these different elements that you're going to have on the page, and it gets to be quite heavy. This option is not a good option, in my opinion. The next option is to override Bootstrap's classes. So there's a .btn that comes with Bootstrap. You can come in here and you can override it in a CSS file afterwards, and you can say, here's all the things that I want to apply in order to get this. This again adds 43 lines of code. You lose the semantic ability because you want to end up using the naming conventions that come with Bootstrap. Once again, you compound that extra added lines among all the elements that you're going to have, and it's going to add bloat to your page. The next option is just to simply go into Bootstrap, find the BTN class, and where it says color is gray, you change it to color is green. Where it says font is black, you change the font to white. This doesn't add any extra code to Bootstrap. In some instances it takes away, but now you have completely disconnected from Bootstrap. If you decide to bring in any other element or any other, you want to upgrade, go to 3.2 to 4.0, whatever the version of Bootstrap is nowadays, you want to go, you cannot do that. You've completely disconnected from using future Bootstrap. Modular design. Yes.
Which of those were you recommending then?
They all sounded bad.
I think the general consensus to me is not to use it, but
You can't just use the preprocessor, right? Less the SAS, and change it there.
we'll get to that. Yes, somebody's been doing their homework. Modular design. So there's this concept out there of atomic design. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but Brad Frost came up with the concept. To me, it's not really revolutionary. It's something we've been doing all along. He just put a great concept around it and made it more visible to all of us. And what it does, the parts, it divides everything up into different parts. So what you have is your atoms. These are basically your basic part of your site, your labels, your input, your table, your button, your font, your colors, all those stuff. Those are your atoms. Your molecules are your atoms taken together and built together into a concept. Your input plus a label is your form element. Your search plus a button, search text box plus a button is your search form. Your table plus your sorting is your table plus sort. Taking those molecules together, putting it, you build an organism. A navigation bar, for example, consists of navigation buttons and links. search form, and a logo. Those are all the things that create an organism. Templates, this is where we kind of disconnect from the biochemistry analogy, and we just go into straight CS, and templates are organisms combined together to form a page-level object. Your page layout, how are you going to display certain search results? Those are the templates that you're going to follow. And pages are specific instances of templates. This is where the frameworks kind of miss also. They do not know what the building atoms of your site is going to be, what the building blocks of your site are going to be, so they're not able to help you with that. To implement dynamic design, you must be considerate. It must be considered from the very beginning. It's impossible to create a framework that can be everything to everybody. It's just not possible. The other thing is, I've heard somebody say, is I like to build a framework around a design, not design around a framework. And so that's one of the difficulties that frameworks kind of put in front of you. File organization. So this is also where sort of the frameworks kind of miss the boat. Keeping file organized is one of the key things. We start with a small project, but always our projects become bigger and bigger. And if we most of the way people have organized their code, I see this quite often in CSS, is it's either the piles on the floor policy, which is I'm going to create a CSS folder, and I'm going to put all my CSS either in one file or in multiple files, but it's just all in one folder. The other option that you have is the sock drawer organization, which you're going to devote a drawer to things, but then you just still, again, you're going to dump all your socks within that drawer. Neither of these options are good options, and you'll see in Bootstrap, for example, you'll see it has especially in the less implementation of it, you'll see it gives you a lot of, just dumps everything in there for you to take a look at. Same thing with Zurb. It did implement a little bit of modularity by putting the functions and the settings separately, but then it's got components and it just dumped everything in there. What I recommend is a modular organization, which is you just basically break down your site into modules, modules of implementation. So my friend Dale Sand, he wrote extensively about this, and he's got an article out there, Clean Out Your SaaS Junk Drawer, and he explains it quite well. And basically, what he is advertising is that you break down those atoms and those molecules that we talked about, and you break it down and you build a modular concept for it. You see, we have an accordion, we have data grid, we have button, we have forms, we have header. Those are all the different modules of the site. Essentially, this is another example of the file structure. You'll see, and in here you'll see we've created a modules section. If we look at that a little bit more closely, you'll see that the modules is broken down into, for example, registration, purchase, and those are the CSS exclusive for those areas. The advantage of doing this is that you can compile either the entire thing here, or you can compile individual sections of it. So if your desire is, for example, to have a separate file for your registration.css, for example, you can compile all of that CSS that is exclusive to registration section and put it in a file, and you can download that separately. So I don't know if you guys, how well you can see this, but so this is an input. So after we divided everything into its modular sections, what we've done is that we have this one file, call it whatever you like. We call it style.scss, and here is where we're importing all of these different files that we want to be using within our CSS. And the end result is the compiled version of the file, which is a style.css that we're going to use on the entire site. Coding conventions. Now, like I said, I'm pretty sure Bootstrap and Foundation, they have their coding convention, but they don't advertise it very much. And it's up to you to take a look at it and decide whether you're going to follow that. But having a unified naming convention that, like I said, not only is a way to kind of communicate among each other what you're trying to implement and where you're trying to implement it, but it's a good way of explaining what is being implemented where. So a unified naming convention is a good thing to have. And the other thing that you want to have, the way I build files is being a consultant going in, I build it for the next person who wants to come in. So to me, commenting and putting comments in there is very important. You don't see the comments very much in these frameworks, and I think it's very important for us to communicate through different commenting and having a good structure to our code. The ability to package each component in order for proper consumption is also key. I mean, it's one of the things that I showed you in the modular organization. Zurb Foundation does a good job of that because you can go to their site and you can download individual sections of it. I'm not sure if Twitter does it, Bootstrap does it or not, but your component should be able to do that. Your CSS should be able to do that. CSS is also part of the problem. So CSS is old. It can't be changed in the sense that the WC3 board or the CSS3 board that sits and governs what changes come in is it's very cumbersome to get things going there. It operates in a global namespace. It's based on inheritance. It's the good and bad part of CSS. Source order is critical. Cascade needs managing, and you can override anything by just having very specificity. So the problem with these problems with CSS, it's very hard to make a framework that everybody can use all the time. So there is a method to the madness of saying why and when these frameworks should or should not be used. So Scott Callum wrote a great article that says UIKit is dead. And in it, he says your CSS should not dictate how HTML or the design of the site should look, but they are instead tools to help you reach your own design ideals. I mean, so that's the general theme of it. In general, when you bring in a framework, the framework kind of dictates your look and your feel, and it's up to you to go work around it. CSS isn't, he also mentioned CSS isn't voodoo. It's simple and straightforward language where you declare an element, has a style, and it happens. So that's the thing. When I was sitting in that discussion of we can't go to Foundation 3. From Foundation 3.2 to Foundation 4.0, and it was like a hour-long meeting, and all throughout that meeting, the thing that was going through my head was, are we still talking about CSS? Because, I mean, they were talking about something that it sounded foreign to me. I mean, all we're doing is we're taking an element, and we're saying this element is going to have this style. Simple. Harry Roberts of CSSwizardry.com says a CSS framework should not do your work for you. It should allow you to do your own work faster. So that's part of the illusion of a CSS framework also. When it's downloaded, everybody's all excited. Wow, look, I downloaded this and it works and it's got everything for me and I can do these amazing things, but then your design comes in and they're like, oh shit, I have to go through each line of code and say, where do I change this? You spend quite a bit of time trying to learn somebody else's code, where that's where the sort of decision comes into play, where at which point do you decide to learn somebody else's code or just simply write your own. So the question is, should I use a CSS framework? Short answer is, Brad Frost stated it in his introduction to Pattern Lab. He said, do the shit yourself. Just write it yourself. Build it in a modular fashion and take advantage of CSS preprocessors like Sass. Notice I didn't mention less or stylus. To me, there's no other preprocessor. So, I mean, you can easily build all these things in a modular fashion, and you can do that. So I'm going to go back to my button example, and I created a code pen for it. I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but this is all built in Sass. You'll see it has plenty of mix-ins in here. The mix-in that I want you to take a look at is this. Now, CodePen doesn't allow me to, I mean, I guess I could have, but these mix-ins, for example, are from a different file that I brought in. But in essence, if I was going to build this in a modular fashion, there would be a button.scss file that would contain this. So what I've done is I've created these button properties that I want all my buttons to have. I wanted to have a min width, I want to have a height, I wanted to have a certain opacity, and so on. And what I've done is I've created a generate button. And what this allows me to do is that it allows me to create as many different buttons as I want. So that, and it does quite a bit of things for me, and I'll show you the compiled CSS that I've created 2 buttons, a form button and an action button. And you'll see that it creates hover, an active, a disabled, and so on. So, and what this does, the end result of this implementation is that I just created a form button that I said, just take the defaults, generate the button for me. Or I created an action button that I said I want it to be these different colors. I can create as many buttons as I want with this, and the beauty of that is if my designer comes and says, you know what, I don't like that red color, I want us to use badass. This is not good CSS code because I would have put these colors in a variable, we use that variable, but forgive me. Anyway, so I just changed that, and now my action buttons are using the right colors that my designer told me to use. So, I mean, so some of you are going to probably think that, you know what, I want to create just a simple prototype. I want to put a single page out there and so on, and maybe in those instances a framework might be a good thing for you. But for an enterprise or a large application, I highly recommend not doing that. So if you want a happy medium, I would say use it bit by bit. I take advantage of Foundation's grid system. I love it. I don't see any reason why I need to rewrite that. It's a great thing. So I have taken the time to get the grid system and put it, build it in a modular fashion that I can use it anywhere I want. Learn from it. I would highly recommend looking at the code. And if you're looking at, for example, a button, there's no reason why you can't extract that button code and put your own code in there. I mean, put your own style and everything in there. Build your own structure, and I highly recommend using a preprocessor. I mean, the magic that comes with a preprocessor are essentially the reasons they were built are the things that we are lacking in CSS itself, and what it allows us to do is incredible. So the last thing I want is a quote that I want you guys to think about every time you start a project, and it's that when building a site or a web application, one must build it for success. Success means that small projects will evolve into large projects. That's the attitude that I take when I go to any project. I build it so that it can be built upon. The person that said that is me. So, so the idea is that you should build things for it to be built upon. Unfortunately, I don't think frameworks give that to us. But there's always hope. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Did I just turn you guys off, or it's just like, or this guy cuckoo? I'm gonna go use Bootstrap. I don't care what he says. Yes.
Could you put that link that you had on the first slide back up?
First slide. Oh, sure. I'm going to share all these with you, but yeah.
Okay.
You want access to the slides? Yeah. All the links and everything are going to be in there, and you guys, I'll tweet it out and I'll share it. Yes.
I have a question in regards to SAS, because that's something we started using in our office. But we're having kind of an interesting way of how to deal with it in like team situations. We don't go through a workflow where we have like our designers and developers work on an own local copy and push it. We actually have like pipeline, like different websites that are in dev. Everyone works on that. Then we kind of basically move that from dev to production. So it's just like, and we've kind of had struggling with how to work with SAS in that environment. Because in theory, we're using kind of some global like defaults, but multiple designers are working and pulling from that file all at once. I was wondering if you had any experience and maybe some insight on how to better structure that in a team environment.
So the question is using SAS in a global environment, team environment, and how to how to handle that. Do you guys have a config file that you put everything in? So to me, the starting point of everything is, let me see if I have this here.
I guess while you're figuring that, I can give you what our convoluted setup. But basically, we do have like a CSS reset and some of the basic styles that are kind of defaults. They don't actually, they're more structure oriented and not style oriented. And all of this is currently actually stored on a web share. And we actually run it from a server. So we actually have SAS running in Ruby on the server, and all the users are kind of just editing files directly on the web server and updating. I know, that's kind of scary. And I haven't come up with a better solution yet. Because the other thing, the problem was we had multiple users using their own SAS running on their own computers, all watching the same files, and it just got a little also scary as well.
So the way I've done it is, regardless of whether you have different sections of a site and people are creating different CSS of the site, you pretty much have a main one, right? That everybody sort of starts using, and the difference is where you sort of create your own config files that says, all right, on this version of, or this area of the site, all my buttons are going to be red versus on that it's going to be blue. The other thing is I never check in a compiled version of the CSS. When you have Sass, I always ignore. I use Git a lot, and I always ignore the compiled version of the CSS, and I check in only the Sass files. So that ensures that whoever gets it, when they compile, they use the same. They essentially compile it the same way. Your situation is kind of something I have to take a look at.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. Thank you, and I'll be around if you have any questions.